Welcome. I'm Julie Birt with the Campus Writing Program. I'm the coordinator and resident science ed person who likes Excel spreadsheets, unlike some of my colleagues. You'll see Christy over there like, when it comes to spreadsheets, but I'm really excited to show you how I've been using Google Sheets in some of my classwork with science classes. I feel like it can also be used for quite a few of our writing intensive classes as a way to kind of organize students' thoughts. So I've shared with you the Google Sheet for today, which also contains our agenda. So first we're going to talk about just some ways to test out using it in this virtual like active learning environment. And we're going to do some sample teaching strategies that I've, just some examples from what I've used it for. And I'll walk you through kind of how to use Google Sheets and how to make sure you share it well with your students. So I'm joined today by Amy Lannon, who is the director of the Campus Writing Program, and as well as Christy Goldsmith. There's Amy. Hi, Amy. And Christy Goldsmith, the assistant director, I can't remember which one it is, of the Campus Writing Program. These two ladies are awesome for ideas of how to help our students write better. And Keisha, our fabulous GRA, who I'm pretty sure knows more about Excel and Google Sheets kind of things than me. So any suggestions you have, Keisha, as we're walking through this, I welcome any sort of feedback. So feel free to stop me, interrupt me, ask me questions as we move through this. So off to the left, I've also just listed kind of some of the main ways that I use Google Sheets. I use it for lab data analysis, obviously like the most obvious way to use Google Sheets. So students can share data for labs, analyze data as groups in breakout rooms via Zoom. Jigsaw group strategies. So anytime where each student or each group becomes an expert on something and then brings that concept back to the class to teach the other students, I use Google Sheets for how they share their expert knowledge. I also just use it for helping students to take notes collaboratively, and I'll show you an example of how I do that. And then some exploratory writing. So using that information to write and to begin writing and finding those common themes throughout these tables. And of course, I pulled a Bean quote because John Bean is one of our favorite people that we reference when we talk about how we can use writing. And we're going to focus today on those tools for exploratory thinking and using this Google Sheets as a tool. So everybody has access to the Google Sheet. So we're going to try it out. So if you'll move to the second tab at the bottom, it says try it out. I'd like for you to go ahead and fill in any line. So I filled in the first line with my course information. You'll notice that the third row, you'll see the directions. So just tell us a little bit about your class. If you should notice the colors where people are writing so you can find your own row. Tell me about what kind of class you're teaching right now, or you have taught or plan to teach. Christy, so yeah, if you have access to a computer right now to add to our Google Sheet, feel free to add your information about your class that you're currently teaching or you plan to teach, so we can learn a little bit more about what we're looking at as a group.
Oh, the Google Sheets. Shoot.
Well, welcome. If you're just, oh, there you go. Hi, Lori, welcome. Christy's going to drop our Google Sheet that we're working out of in the chat. Glad you're here. We are just adding information about what course you're teaching right now, just to try out some Google Sheet work. So you'll notice as you're doing this, I'm going to talk while you're writing, that it's really nice about Google Sheets is that I can see where people are writing currently. So it turns that gray color, which helps that the students don't have to worry about overlapping each other when we're talking synchronously. I've had that happen on a few other things where people are trying to type over each other. So that's a really nice feature of Google Sheets and working simultaneously. Woohoo.
Julie, maybe you're gonna tell us this later, but I see that I have already broken the rules by not using your drop-down bar, which seems right. That's exactly what I would do. How did you make the drop-down options? Will you tell us that later, or is now a good time?
Now's a great time. So I use the drop-down option, so that's pretty easy. It's very similar to Excel. If you click on the box, you would go to data validation, and you can choose. You would choose a criteria of a list of items, and then I listed the items here. And so that would give them those choices. And I do that so that, unlike people like you, it would. I'm surprised it didn't show you a warning, Christy, when you entered that. But it helps me if I want to organize these. So whenever I'm going to look at this for students, I might highlight all of them and put them in order by type, by course format. And it's hard to do that if people type them in different formatting. So that's why I chose the drop down there. So everyone, you've used the drop down.
You point out again where you found the data validation. I was on the document and not on the.
No, you're fine. So you click on the box and you go up here to data.
Okay.
And right down here is data validation. Okay. And you can choose a list of items. You can either that, or you can make them choose a number or text or a date. And then with the list of items, you just separated by commas, you give them choices. I can also reject it. Christy, I could have rejected your input, and that probably would have cued you into maybe what was going on. So I find this really helpful. There's a next, I think the next one I'll show you has some specifics for students. We're entering all sorts of wild different types of data, and it wasn't quite what I wanted. So anyway, I can kind of direct them, especially when they're going to use this data together. Looks like we're almost done. Awesome. Give it another minute. So the way that I would use this, I would be using just typical Excel functions. So I might choose things like trying to find, well, what's the average class size? You would just follow the standard Excel functions of, say, I want to find the average. So I might highlight all of my files. And so the average class size for us is about 50, which is kind of thrown off by the fact that I'm going to change H6, so that's in 290. There we go, about 84-ish on average. So we know that we have two outliers. The class that I teach was about 135, and HDFS, which is 290, which to me is just mind blown on number of students, right? So I can look at it that way. I can, the nice thing about this is I can reorder things like I would normally do in any sort of table. So if I go to the top and I hit data and sort range and tell it my data has a header. Oh, come on. Looks like I didn't get row 5. Data, sort range. I would probably sort it by, say, number of students, or I could do it by course format. So sorting allows me to see, well, we have 2 face-to-face classes, and I can look and see in these writing assignments, what's similar, what's different, what kind of conclusions can I draw about these face-to-face classes? our hybrid classes, our online classes. So just different ways to group things and to move around. So it's really similar to Christy 2 weeks ago, presented on Jamboard, but they were using Post-it notes. But the nice part about Excel is that I can make it organize things automatically for me, depending on what data is in there. Well, I appreciate the LTC one about they choose a complex text to teach about their own secondary writing. So the way I would use this in my classes, I might ask them to write in the chat, what do they notice about what's going on, and what kind of themes, what similarities or differences are they finding in this data. So it's just kind of a jumping off points for students to start analyzing information. And data is not just numbers, right? That's something I definitely learned in education. We can find a lot of different data that's more than just numbers. So here's this. I see some chat. Oh yeah, the difference is Jamboard works better for small bits of text. Yeah, so you can type in quite a bit in these sheets, Christy. So why don't I go ahead and show you a few examples from my class. So the first example that I've pulled here are just some of the labs. So one of my labs, I teach in animal science. It's just an introductory animal science class. So you can move to the next tabs, example 1, and I've got it open on the screen, of course. They are asked to go find 3 feed tags from the feed store, and they're supposed to enter all this information about the feed tags. And they have to find it from 3 different stages of a single animal. So this student, for example, this is just example data, pulled 3 different feeds for beef cattle. They had to enter the percent of protein, percent of fat, percent of fiber. So this is during where they're learning about formulating diets. What's important in a diet? What do we look at first? What do we make first? And here's an example feed tag, and I just put that one in there for you guys to see kind of what the students were looking at. What are the minerals and what are the vitamins? And so then after they all enter, each student brings 3 tags and they enter all this data into the spreadsheet. I can use this spreadsheet to kind of help them draw conclusions. And my discussion questions that they write back to me are up here. And I just included those so you guys could see them. They go back in their assignment for their lab as to what similarities and differences do they notice among the feedstuffs, which minerals and vitamins are the most important listed on the label, because not every mineral and vitamin amount is listed on the labels. And why do they think that is? So it's kind of a jumping off point to when they start formulating their own diet. So they notice that the first thing listed is always going to be protein. So we're going to calculate that first and deal with that first when we calculate our diets, and just kind of seeing the range of proteins. And that's where Excel comes in handy. So I can run what's the average, I can run the minimums, the maximums, and ask them to kind of analyze all of that data and those number informations. Any questions?
Julie, what I love about this, I was just thinking about all these ways that I can use this in my class that I'm teaching right now, is that it's kind of like a worksheet wherein it like tells them what information to get, but it's more expansive because they have to like make sense of it. And it also is more real world. They're like learning Google Sheets and Excel at the same time as doing the worksheet and learning the content. So it's like more bang for their buck. I love it.
Right, and the fact that they can see what other people have entered is really helpful, especially because I teach hybrid. So they're doing this before they come to class. So they can kind of see, oh, I didn't pay any attention to what minerals or vitamins were there. Maybe I should go back and look at my feed tags again. And they really seem to enjoy looking at this. It's funny what they pick up on, things that I don't even notice, like phosphorus amounts and differences among chickens or something. So it's always fun to see that. Yeah, lots of bang for their buck. Thanks, Christy. And then you can also use this to make charts and graphs. I'm not going to cover on how to do that. It runs very similar to Excel. I could chart just like the protein percentage. Just like I said, that's a really important part of formulating diets. I can draw a chart on like what percentages were between 0 and 5 or between 5 and 10. So just using the standard data tools, you can insert a chart, and just like I would on Excel. So if you need any help with that, you can let me know. There's some great YouTube videos out there, which is how I learned like all of the Excel that I know, except for using it in class. So in the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next one. So the next tab is a jigsaw. So again, where I ask each student to become an expert, and again, these are just me making up examples, become an expert in a certain type of mating system. So my students, there's like 25 different mating systems. all different animals. I can't cover them all in class. And so the way that I introduce them in this introductory class is I ask each student to research one. And then I want them to provide me some basic information about that. And then they draw conclusions based on what all they see. So for example, poultry, then they have a type. They need to know if it's inbreeding or outbreeding. Again, I've added that they have to choose one or the other. And then advantages and disadvantages. And the goal of this is the students look across and see, hey, we do a lot of inbreeding, because they'll know more as you add more to this. It's a lot of inbreeding that is used in the animal industry. And it's just a great resource for going back to when they're looking at their exam, like, what is this an example of? Oh, I know that Jason wrote this really great definition of it here in the spreadsheet. So again, using it as a way for them to take their expert information and organize it into a form that you can kind of look at and view in groups and reorganize it. I can put all the poultry together. I can put all the sheep or swine or mules together in the Google Sheet. So just an example of how I use it more for words, but allowing the students to share information. And we've got a few minutes left, so I will show you the third example that I use it for. I use it for notes, so that's really similar to the jigsaw. I assign each group one of our nutrients when we talk about nutrition, and I give them parts of the notes and an example for water. And then as a group, they have to fill in each of the rest of these boxes. Where does it get absorbed in our pigs? Where does it get absorbed in cows? Where does it get absorbed in poultry? What's the function of the nutrient? Why are carbohydrates important? What are some examples of feeds? So this one follows the feed example. So this is just a way to help them organize their notes versus just throwing them. These are carbohydrates, they're for energy. They're in simple and complex sugars. Remember, this is an overview class. So it's just a kind of a way for them to kind of digest all of this big, broad information and turn it into a organized note system. So when they're doing their exams or writing their labs, they can have access to that. I also provided them with some pictures so that they can identify the numbers. So the large intestine is number 12 on the pig or on the cow. So yeah, so this is how I use sheets for notes. And they can all contribute to it. So you could do this similarly in a Google Doc. I don't usually reorganize this one, but I can also do the idea of the drop down. I had thought about changing these to drop down choices, right? So that they would only have so many options on which organs to pick, so that hopefully they don't choose something ridiculous like the spleen or something, which we don't really talk about in my introductory class. Any questions about using it for notes? Can't see everybody. That's the worst part about being the one who broadcasts that.
Doing great. I don't see any questions in the chat so far. I think we're just all getting a bunch of ideas. So thanks.
Awesome. I saw something come in. Oh, Lori's scrolling through her brain. Yeah, so small groups working on the same sheet. Yeah, I like the option of tabs. If I think when I use this in my hybrid class next year, I'm just going to keep all the tab, like every lab, just a different tab, so they don't have to keep sending them to new Google Sheets. So I love that the tabs are like new. Each one is new and separate, but they can also be combined, right? It's like Excel. I can pull a number from one sheet and move it to the next tab. So the last thing I have is just how to use it. I've provided some kind of formatting and basics. G Suite is awesome. So I included a link here, how Mizzou is now supporting G Suite, and you can get a Google account in your Mizzou email, so you don't have to store it all. I've given up and started paying for Google storage, which is silly, but I keep a lot of stuff in my Google storage. The link to Google Sheets is here. You should be able to get there from this current page. Feel free to, at the top, you're welcome to, I can't see it on mine, but there should be like a save or make a copy. You're welcome to make a copy of this and use whatever you'd like in your teaching. I have no problem with that. These are just some, it's just basically a chart that I've created, right? An Excel sheet. So yeah, so those are my ideas. Any ideas that are coming to you guys? I'd love to hear about ways that you could use this in your classrooms. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. Any thoughts?
What would you say, Julie, is the maximum number of students? I'm thinking of the big classes, right? The maximum number of students you would want working on one sheet before it gets overwhelming and out of control.
Ooh, that's a good question, Christy. I mean, the maximum number of students we typically have in like a lab is 25, right? So I don't think I do it with more than 25 on a sheet, because I guess it depends on if they're just contributing a line or if they're contributing, like sometimes my students each were contributing 3 lines. I don't know what the maximum is number on Google Sheets is to go down, but it could probably get chaotic with 200 students at the same time. I see it as like a breakout room.
Okay, thanks.
Like maybe group 1 goes on tab 1. What do you think, Lori or Keisha? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've used this previously with my student success seminar class. We have a financial section in there. I was teaching them how to budget, and we actually use that as the breakout. So it's like team 1, you're setting like, what's your weekly, monthly budget? And they had different tabs, and it was easy to evaluate.
That's awesome. So you are using Google Sheets. So I'm not the only crazy person who likes Excel files and anybody could access. Lori wants to know budgeting 101.
I'm thinking also of like literature reviews. Like I do literature reviews in Google Docs, but it would be great to create like a list of drop-down categories so that you can sort them, because I end up having like 87 categories of lit review, and that does not work, right? And students struggle with that. So what if I decided there were 5 boxes and I set the tabs, and then I could sort it by tabs? That could be really cool.
Yeah, I like that idea. I did my lit review in Excel. So.
Yeah, I currently also do my lit review in Excel.
So you guys are already ahead of me. Excellent.
That is such a great idea. I did mine on paper so long ago for my dissertation, but I'm just thinking you could like have that drop down for like keywords that you were wanting to go back and find for different quotes or whatever. I think that would have been really, really helpful. Like I literally took notes on paper and wrote, author, methods, type of research findings, hand wrote it, but this would have been really helpful.
Yeah, I am more welcome to share my sheet, because like when I'm going through papers and I like pull, I kind of like create categorical like the categorical tabs, but it makes it easier. It feels like I'm filling in like when you go to a doctor's office and you're filling in like the check boxes, that's kind of how it feels. But I probably, for one of my meta-analysis for my research, it's probably like 150 articles I have, but with the categories, I'm able to literally like go through and easily remove which articles I don't want to include as well. That way you got the original list, and then you have the list that you sum down, and then etc.
Can you link within Google Sheets? You can, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
That could be super useful.
Yes, Ashley, you can definitely submit Christy had some great pictures on her Jamboard that I didn't save, but if you go into the choices that students get for what they can choose, it says like online, on paper. One of the options is online and website URL, I think is what it's called. And so I just have the students submit the link to their spreadsheet if I were doing that, and then it would just pop up in SpeedGrader, like it's amazing.
The one thing that I run into a problem with that, because I love Google this semester, I've been using a lot of Google links in my Canvas assignments, is that I had to do a little teaching to students on the 2 places you have to click in Google, because Google added that extra step where you have to make it available to anyone and then make them a viewer or an editor if you want them to be able to type. So I asked them to make it viewable to anyone and to comment on, so I can comment directly on there, because I have noticed, and maybe Julie figured out a way around this, you're unable to use like the highlight tools and like the in-text SpeedGrader tools if it's a Google link, or I haven't figured out how to do so.
Yes, sometimes it does cause trouble. So if you hit share, you have to choose on the link, you have to choose anyone with the link can edit. So anyone with the link can be an editor or commentator. Sometimes that's helpful for students. So students have to make sure, like Christy said, yeah, they have to get a little bit of training. And I have to too, like before I sent this out, I was like, okay, can somebody check this and make sure they can open it and you guys can edit in it. You have to make sure that you hit the share and hit anyone with the link can be an editor. And then done, and then you copy the link. Because what's just at the top of the screen won't necessarily allow people to edit it. I see a bunch of chat. Oh, bye guys. Thanks for coming.